Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Anna and I'm going to be hosting this evening's event, which is an introduction to health and human sciences and business at university studies in Bury St Edmunds. So welcome one and all. Thank you for joining us. As a little bit of background, University Studies at West Suffolk College is based in Bury St Edmunds. We're a small but friendly university provision offering degrees, HNCs, HNDs and access courses. We are linked with West Suffolk College, but we are a separate building. We have our own lovely building just pretty much in the heart of Bury, not far from the train station, so it's very accessible to everyone. So we have a couple of speakers for you this evening. We've got Louise that's going to talk about her PhD research. Robin will talk about the student support and the social sciences courses that are available at US, and then I'll run through how to apply and some of the business courses that are available too. So without further ado, Louise, please talk us through your PhD research.
Hi, so as Anna said, I'm Louise. I am the course leader for psychology at University Studies, but today I'm going to talk you through my PhD research that I did a little bit. So let me just make sure that that screen's visible. Yeah, so a couple of years ago now, I did or finished my PhD research, which I actually did at the University of Essex. And I was working on a project for Essex County Council, actually. They'd taken a keen interest in risk behaviour in their region. I'd previously worked as a research assistant in decision making, essentially. So it seemed like the ideal project as far as I was concerned. So risk behaviour, for anyone that isn't aware, there's various definitions of risk behaviour sort of floating around out there, but one of them is Moore and Gallone's definition of risk behaviour, which was behaviour that involves potential negative consequences but balanced in some way by perceived positive consequences. Because risk behaviour, although we see it as being sort of synonymous with negative consequences, risk behaviour can also be a positive thing in some senses as well. You know, every time we talk to someone we've never spoken to before, every time we sign up for a university course, there's an element of risk to that, but it's a positive risk, right? It helps us to expand our worldview, it helps us to be more open-minded, it helps us to experience new things, and that's really important as well. But of course, negative risk behaviour can be quite problematic. It can lead to a lot of harmful consequences, potentially, that I'll talk about shortly. And so this is why risk behaviour has really become the focus of a lot of research at the moment. My piece of research was specifically focused on risk behaviour in adolescence in particular. So my next slide is just the definition of what adolescence is. Again, a slightly contentious topic, but the World Health Organization currently sees an adolescent as being anyone between the ages of 10 and 19. So it's sort of that period at which you're beginning to find your independence, you're on the cusp of sort of moving into adulthood. And it's those teen years, really, where people do tend to get a little bit rebellious, perhaps, or that's sort of what is thought of in terms of teenagers. And so we do see a lot of risk behaviour begin to crop up in this particular age group. My research was particularly focused on sort of 12 to 13-year-olds, so year 8s basically, because that seems to be the age, or at least what the research suggests and what some of the stakeholders that I spoke to suggested, was that actually that seems to be the age at which people are just perhaps veering down the path of engaging in some negative risk behaviours, but aren't necessarily there yet. So it's the sort of age that you can catch people at before they move into something that might be more detrimental in the future. So as I said, you know, risk behaviour is certainly not always a negative thing. It can be sort of have positive elements to it as well. And risk behaviour in adolescence is often considered to be part of our typical development. As I said, meeting new friends, having new experiences, they all carry some level of risk, whether it's the risk of being rejected or the risk of, you know, failing something. They're all risks, but they're positive risks that we have to take to sort of develop our independence and our autonomy and who we are as human beings. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of risk behaviours can be associated with quite negative consequences. So there's lots of evidence out there now that suggests multiple risk behaviour in particular, which is generally cases where someone engages in 2 or more types of risk behaviour, so perhaps smoking and unprotected sex, for example, 2 different risk behaviours. If a person was displaying both of them, we might refer to that as multiple risk behaviour. And multiple risk behaviour is associated with increased morbidity and mortality, being diagnosed with STIs, being involved with the police, getting worse GCSE grades, and all of those things can have a knock-on effect into our adulthood, right? If we're smoking when we're a teenager, we're more likely to go on to develop lung disease in adulthood, for example. So lots of companies and educational services and county councils, as I was working for, are interested in how do we reduce risk behaviour in our young people. So one way to do that is to look at what drives people to engage in those risk behaviours in the first place. There are certain things that perhaps create an environment where people are more likely to engage in risk behaviour, and we refer to those things as risk factors. So they're anything about the individual or their wider life, their environment that they're exposed to, that actually makes it more likely that they'll engage in risk behaviour, essentially. And on the other side of the coin, we have positive things as well. So we can have protective factors. So perhaps you have got, you know, a slightly rowdy group of friends at school that encourage you to take part in risk behaviours. But perhaps on the other side of that, you've got a really encouraging, supportive family unit. So you can have a risk factor on the one hand and a protective factor on the other. And when we're trying to prevent risk behaviour, what we're looking at now is reducing risk factors and increasing protective factors as much as is possible anyway. And that's what the programme that I evaluated as part of my PhD research aimed to do. So Risk Avert is a programme that was designed by a company called The Training Effect alongside Essex County Council back in 2013, and they run it with Year 8 students. It started just in Essex, it's expanded now to other counties as well. And the whole aim of it is basically to educate people and help them understand risk, change their perception of risk, and also change how they manage risk as well. And it's all delivered in schools by teachers. So my PhD research was essentially focused on, does this programme work? That was what I was being paid to do, was figure out, you know, evaluate it. Is it doing what they are paying for it to do, essentially? A key part of the Risk Avert programme is what was referred to as the Risk Avert screening tool. So this is basically a little questionnaire that everyone in Year 8 would be asked to fill out that would assess the level of risk that they might potentially be exposed to or might begin to engage in the future, or perhaps are already engaging in. So it was split into a number of different sections. So things about them as an individual, things about their school life, you know, whether they were being bullied, those sorts of things, things about their family, and then also about the community. You know, is there lots of graffiti in the areas that you live, and those sorts of things, because elements of all of these can be risk factors and they can be protective factors as well, but we need something that measures those to tell us who it is that we need to sort of be targeting essentially with these types of programs. So I actually ran 4 different studies as part of my PhD research, not all at once, thankfully, but one after the other, pretty much. There was 4 different studies. So the first one was just to look at the Risk Avert screening tool. Is it actually measuring risk? Essentially, was what we wanted to know. The second study was about looking at whether the Risk Avert screening tool, whether we were scoring it correctly, and whether it was giving us similar results to what other risk measures that have already been validated and sort of vetted as being good. Is the Risk Avert screening tool telling us the same thing as those other measures would be? Then studies 3 and 4 were more focused on the evaluation of the programme and whether it was working. So study 3 was about looking at, okay, measuring risk before and after the programme, do we see an improvement in people's risk factors? And study 4, because it was all being run in schools, was about actually speaking to school staff and seeing what impact they saw in the students that they were running the programme with, and getting their sort of thoughts about an experience of actually running this program in schools. You know, teachers are incredibly busy people, and being asked to run another program can be, you know, an extra weight on them that they don't necessarily need. But, you know, how were they making it work for them, essentially? So obviously I won't get into the nitty-gritty of how all of those studies were run, because it took me 4 years to do, and I could probably spend 4 years talking about it as well. But essentially what we found was that actually the risk alert screening tool was pretty good at figuring out who had high potential for risk behaviour and who had lower potential for risk behaviour. But as with most things, there's always room for improvement, right? So there were some questions that we suggested might need to be moved into other sections. There were some questions that we said, actually, that might just need to come out. It's not telling you as much as you were sort of hoping for originally. So the screening tool was good, but room for improvement. In terms of the programme, so the study that I ran, unfortunately didn't really provide sort of concrete evidence for the programme itself being effective. We didn't see a reduction in risk behaviour in the groups of students that we looked at, but, you know, that was only 2 sets of students out of, you know, many more that the programme was actually being done with, so a small sample. But what we did see was that actually people who didn't take part in the programme, their risk behaviour continued to increase, whereas the people who took part in the risk alert programme, their risk behaviour remained the same. So that suggested that there might be some preventive effect of the risk alert programme, which is really positive. And the other really positive thing we found was that actually, even if the sort of questionnaires we were using to look at risk behaviour weren't necessarily picking up changes in people's behaviour, school staff members were saying, actually, we think this programme is making a real difference. We are seeing a day-to-day change in people's behaviour. You know, we are seeing pupils come to us more often before they have an issue, rather than us needing to sort of pick up the pieces afterwards and that sort of thing. So they were making a lot of adaptations to the programme so that they could fit it in with the rest of the school day, but ultimately they had really positive views of it. So, you know, as I said, this was 4 years of research, so it was a big project, but risk behaviour is definitely a real interest of mine, because there's so many avenues that you can go down. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Louise. That's really useful. I think what hopefully lots of people at home will be thinking and sort of considering when hearing you speak about your research and the work you've done is how what you've done in the past will feed into the sort of work that they'll be doing if they came and studied with us, working with really experienced and experts just like you. So if you're sitting at home listening to that and thinking that sounds really interesting, well, that's exactly the sort of thing that you could be exploring if you came and studied with us at University Studies. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass over to Robin to talk through what support you may expect to experience while studying with us. Robin, are you there?
Indeed, yes. If we can get the PowerPoint up onto slide 15, then I'll talk everyone through the array of help and support that's available to people who come to study with us. We are a remarkably supportive environment, and it has to be said, in the various student feedback data we get at the end of each year. One of the things that many people flag up to us, particularly, it has to be said, students who have started their studies at another university and then applied to transfer across to us, is the huge amount of personal support that people get at West Suffolk College at university studies, which often they simply do not get at universities where there might be anything from 80 people to 120, 30 people in a lecture theatre, and people feel that they sort of disappear into this huge crowd, whereas with us there's far more of a supportive environment, far more of a nurturing environment, which many people positively thrive within. So when you come along to do your studies, regardless of the particular subject matter that you choose to study, you'll be appointed a personal academic tutor. This is a task that myself, Louise, and various other lecturers all have. We divide the various students within the class between ourselves, and so you're given a named person who is your PAT, your personal academic tutor, and you have 2 sessions, one in the first semester, one in the second semester, more if you would like to request additional sessions. But those 2 sessions are really to stay in touch with you, see how you're doing with your assignments, how you're getting on with the other students, how you're finding the various different lecturers, if you've got any money worries or perhaps issues to do with family, employment, housing, all the sorts of things that go on in our day-to-day private lives that might be impacting your ability to study. So the personal academic tutor can deal with the more academic side of that in terms of helping you with assignments. But if you go to them and say, well, I've got all sorts of worries about I might be losing my job, I'm worried about how I'm going to pay my bills, etc., then the PAT can forward you on, refer you on to other sources of support who will advise you, and from a much more specialist point of view, such as the pastoral support tutors who can deal with those aspects of your life as well. So your PAT is your first point of call in terms of gaining you help and support, not only with the academic side of things, but also in terms of referring you on to more pragmatic day-to-day sources of help for things like housing, employment, worries about relationships, and all of the sorts of things that affect student life. The library staff are excellent at supporting you with your assignments, particularly if you've got any uncertainties around things like referencing, which for a lot of people, if you've perhaps been out of education for a very long period of time and you're just coming into it, getting used to the different styles of how to reference a book or a journal or a statement that you want to make within an essay or some similar form of assignment can be quite a challenging area to get your mind around. And so the library staff are there to guide you through that mysterious world of referencing, as well as to help you find all of the textbooks that you will need in your studies if you're not sure where to find the sorts of information that you need. Some students may worry that they're going to have to spend 3 arms and a leg on textbooks. The library has a tremendous set of resources, and they can also help you with tracking down secondhand books on various different websites, and there's a lot of secondhand bookshops around the Bury St Edmunds area, so you can often pick up texts there, as well as buying books from graduates who are selling off their old textbooks, so you don't necessarily have to remortgage your kidney in order to pay for your textbooks. There's all sorts of ways around that, and the library can help there too. You might decide as you go along in your studies that you would like to have a work placement. Most of the courses these days are, certainly the courses that Louise and I teach to take as examples, we have guest speakers in from various different professions based around psychology and sociology and criminology, who will come in and give talks about how to get into the kinds of careers that they work in, what's needed in terms of not only your bachelor's study, but master's studies, possibly PhDs in some cases, and a number of careers also not only give number of courses not only give you career talks, but in some cases they can include work placements. So to give you an example of something we're looking at for next year at the moment, there's a charity that specializes in therapy dogs and other animals to support people going through various forms of trauma, and they're looking to get some assistance with doing some research to present to funding bodies to demonstrate that their therapy dogs really do bring a benefit, and it's not just a nice cute thing to do, it's of a genuine benefit to people. So they are in contact with us to ask about whether students can come and help conduct this research with them. So that's hopefully something that will be in place by September, October of this year for not only our level 5 students, but our new enrolling level 4 students, who will be able to spend a period of time working for that charity, gain some experience, gain hopefully a really good reference that they can take with them and something to add to their CV, so that once they've graduated, that will give them a bit of extra clout when it comes to moving into whatever kind of career they eventually decide they want to work in. And we have members of staff there, work placement officers, who can specialise in finding you suitable places should you want one. Quite a number of students have special educational needs, things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, various issues that affect their capacity to process words or numbers or other issues. We have members of staff who specialise in conducting assessments to work out what particular issues somebody may have, if they feel that they have an issue that needs addressing, and once the assessments are carried out, to then provide them with a variety of services. And there are sources of financial aid for that. So if somebody needs, for example, a scribe to help write answers in an exam, that could be because they have an educational need, or it could be something as straightforward as a broken arm. They're not able to write on the day and they need somebody to come in and assist them with writing on that day. There are sources of financial aid and support to assist with all of that. Some people have mental health challenges and difficulties, maybe pre-existing their attendance at the course, or something happens to them, some traumatic event that causes them to develop issues during their years of study with us. We have specialist helpers who can attend to your needs, help with assessments, help with advising staff on how best to support you in your particular struggles and challenges that are faced to you by your mental health issues. Lots of people have money worries, especially, I dare say, many of you will be aware, bills are going up and all sorts of financial problems are facing every single person in society at the moment. This is an issue that a lot of people might want to seek additional support and advice with, looking for grants, looking for loans, looking for sources of financial aid and support. And we have members of staff who can help you track down those sorts of grants and financial sources and help you fill in what sometimes can seem quite challenging and complicated forms in order to access those forms of service. If we can shift on to slide number 16, please. Alongside all of the various forms of support we can provide you, we've got quite an active equal opportunities programme that's designed to support people with a wide range of issues, including recruitment of underrepresented groups onto various different courses. No doubt many of you will be aware that for several years now, academic departments all over the country have been trying to get more female students involved in STEM subjects like engineering and the various scientific disciplines, because historically there haven't been that many women over the previous decades getting involved in those subjects. So there's a movement to recruit more women to those kinds of disciplines. Some subjects are also underrepresented in terms of people from ethnic minority backgrounds, and so there's been various recruitment projects around the country to draw in people from Asian, Black, East Asian, South Asian and various other ethnic backgrounds onto different courses, and to help people address those issues. We have a wide range of support strategies in place for students with disabilities. Now, whether they are physical disabilities or whether they are mental or intellectual disabilities, mental illnesses and so forth, all of those can potentially impact somebody's ability to study, and there's a raft of sources of help and support available for people going through those kinds of challenges and potential difficulties to help them get through. We have active support for people from all sorts of other minority backgrounds, sexual minorities, religious minorities and so forth, to provide them with the the level of support, the level of assistance that they need to feel that they can fully participate in university life. I'm not able to see anybody posting questions or anything, but if there are any questions, I can address those.
We don't have any questions yet, Robin, but I think that I did post earlier on. If anyone does have any questions, we do have the Q&A function at the top of your screen, so do feel free to post in there and we'll answer anything that comes up as we go. And if there's anything that we can't answer, then I'm sure we will come back to you with the accurate response. So I think hopefully everyone at home is now seeing that in terms of the support that's available, the diversity of people that are studying with us is really, really prominent at university studies, and I think that's a real strength. So no matter what background you're from, what your stage in your life you're at, then there's certainly support academically and sort of as a more holistic approach, there's definitely support available in order to ensure that you're able to achieve the best sort of results for you. So Robin, sort of your main role at university studies is a lecturer. So could you talk us through what the involvement in your courses across sort of human and social sciences are?
Certainly, it's being a little bit slow at the moment to get the PowerPoint up, so do bear with me. I think my computer is feeling as old and decrepit as I do some days, but I'll be there we go. Hopefully that will get it working. Yeah. The main subjects which we cover, both Louise and myself, are psychology for Louise. I do a little bit of psychology as well, sociology and criminology, and this is still not letting me share. Right, I'm not sure why this is being so slow. Oh, that would be lovely if you can, Bella. Perfect, thank you. Now, at the moment, we have a number of degree paths running in this coming year. We have the straight psychology, which Louise covers, and I'm sure can answer any specific questions that I don't cover as I go along on the straight psychology route. Eventually, there will be a straight sociology route as well, but that will be starting a bit later. We also have psychology run in conjunction with criminology and a sociology route in conjunction with criminology as well. So I'll talk you through the two criminology conjunction routes, and then if there's any additional questions or Louise would like to just chip in a few general points, we can pick up on those in terms of the straight psychology route after. So if we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. What we'll take you through is an overview of the various different modules and what to expect should you enroll in either the psychology with criminology route or the sociology with criminology option, both of which the criminology topics covered are identical for both. It's just the psychology, sociology elements that differ for those two degree routes. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of getting an overview of psychology with criminology, this is a combination of obviously criminology being the study of crime. There are other, it explains itself in that one. The study of crime in this context takes a very broad perspective. It looks at some psychological factors, biological factors, genetic factors in driving people towards criminal behaviours, particularly some of the more overtly extreme forms of violence, psychopathy, sociopathy, various problems that can manifest there, and also factors in broader sociological issues such as concerns around the the driving force of poverty on edging some people towards a life of particularly property, financial related crimes, to make money by dubious routes if they're struggling to make ends meet by more legitimate routes. So it's a fusion of those, whilst psychology itself delves into the broad functioning of the human mind in a wide variety of different contexts, some of which do have an overlap with criminology, but some of which do explore other areas unrelated to crime. If we can slide into the next screen, please. Thank you. So in your first year, in terms of what you can expect to cover, in your first semester, which is from September up until Christmas, you have three main modules that you'll be looking at. The ones in blue are the psychology modules, and the ones in black typeface are the criminology modules. So you have two psychology modules to cover before Christmas and one criminology module. And likewise, between Christmas and summer, as we go into semester 2, you get the one remaining psychological module and two criminological modules. If we can move to the next slide, please. So at level 5 into your second year, and I realise this is projecting way ahead, you go into more depth in terms of research methods, social developmental psychology, which looks at childhood development, as well as how people develop socially as adults, how they interact with each other in much more depth. So in the first year, there was a laying of the groundwork for those ideas with the introductory module. And in the second year, it goes into much more depth. Just as the research module, you had an introductory research module in the first year to get you to grips with maths, with research methods, statistical analysis, different ways of carrying out experimentation and other forms of research. The Penology module deals with prison systems and other forms of punishment dispensed both in Britain today, but also looking at things that were dispensed historically. So we can go back to the first half of the 20th century, when we still used to hang people in this country, and explore arguments for and against execution as a form of punishment. And there are still many countries around the world that continue to execute prisoners for various different offences to this very day. Some cultures also institute other rather more, by our standards I suppose, fairly harsh forms of punishment, flogging, removal of limbs, but also more moderate forms of punishment like community service, the paying of fines, although I suppose whether that's moderate does depend on the size of the fine and how much money you've got to pay it with, and a wide variety of other penalties that can be applied on top of that. So there'd be an exploration not only of how prisons run, but also of all these other varieties of punishments, with a particular focus, because this is an academic subject, on looking at the evidence for what actually works and where certain forms of punishment clearly fail to work in terms of rehabilitating people and stopping them from committing a life of crime, why it is failing to work. So it delves much more deeply into that. In the second semester after Christmas, the biological and cognitive psychology builds on the introductory one that you had at level 4, going into far greater depth on brain structure, on the central and peripheral nervous systems, and the biological underpinnings of consciousness and various mental functions. And cognitive psychology looks at a mixture of how we engage in information processing, for example, how we learn to problem solve and things like that, as well as delving into elements that overlap more into the realm of therapies such as cognitive behavioural therapy, and how our processing functions are not just for solving crosswords and puzzles and working out how to drive a car or navigate your way around a map, but also how that can lead to emotional problems, how it can lead to dysfunctional thinking about the world, or equally for some people it leads to very functional, healthy, positive states of mind. The Understanding Severe Crime module is rather grim, and this is as close as you'll get to a trigger warning as such with this path of study, in that clearly looking at criminology we're going to have to, at various different points, look at really rather revolting and unpleasant crimes. So whilst some elements of criminology deal with things like shoplifting, which hopefully are not too gruesome for anybody, there is a focus on sexual abuse, there's a focus on terrorism, there's a focus on domestic violence, street violence, serial killing, all sorts of really quite pronounced and unpleasant forms of crime. And it is perfectly possible that there may be students, or indeed members of staff for that matter, involved in the tuition of these courses who have had direct personal experience, either their own life or the life of a friend or relative that's been affected by severe crime, and so these are dealt with sensitively. But you do need to be prepared as a student of criminology to realise that you're going to have to look at some quite grim things. We're not going to show you any horrific pictures of people that have been chainsawed or anything like that, but we will be discussing matters of a traumatic nature. So do be aware of that if you are choosing to enrol. Victimology explores the whole raft of theories that try to answer why, when we look at demographics, which is the patterns of the types of people affected by crime, why often you find the same sorts of people cropping up again and again. Certain age groups, certain racial groups, certain social class groups, certain religious groups, etc., crop up repeatedly as victims of certain types of crime. And that's led to both psychologists, sociologists, criminologists to reflect on the reasons why certain people are apparently prone to become victims of certain type of crimes, and perhaps even more significantly and importantly, what can be done to protect those people from becoming victims of those types of crimes in future. So victimology delves into the ins and outs of all of those different avenues. If we can go on, thank you. So in your final year, you have 2 modules before Christmas and 2 modules after Christmas, and these run in conjunction with what is referred to as a major project, or you might be more familiar with the use of the term dissertation. This is a sizable piece of work which you design for yourself, between 6,000 and 8,000 words long. A research project, you go out, you choose your issue. It does have to be approved by an ethics panel, so you might not be able to do your absolute first choice because the ethics panel might come back and say, well, you need to change it this way, you need to change it that way to make it a more ethically acceptable form of work. But within reason, we can accommodate most requests for research. You will be supported by a personal tutor throughout your dissertation, and supported by the library staff who can help you access all sorts of books and journals and various things that you might need. Now, you might choose to have your dissertation primarily focused on psychology, or you might choose to have it primarily focused on criminology, or maybe a half and half approach. The route you go down does depend and reflect which modules you do in your second semester, because you'll notice that 2 of them, the Psychology of Marketing and Persuasion and the Community and Public Involvement in Crime and Criminal Justice, are listed as optional. Now, what this means is that everybody does the psychometric testing and the contemporary issues in policing in the first semester. If you decide that your dissertation, your major project, is going to be primarily psychological, then instead of doing that psychology module, you would be asked to do the community involvement and public involvement in crime, so that you're getting a nice balance of half criminology and half psychology. On the other hand, if your dissertation is mainly criminological, then you'd drop the community and public involvement and instead do the psychology of marketing and persuasion. So again, you get that 50-50 balance between the 2 subjects. Now, psychometry of testing in employment, some of you may well have been through this if you've applied for a job and you've been asked to take various tests to find out what kind of personality you've got, what kind of a temperament you have, what sets of skills you're particularly strong at, or maybe find rather more challenging. Many employers use various forms of personality and other styles of testing, both when they're recruiting brand new members of staff, but also if they're moving existing staff from one department to another department, to make sure the right kind of person gets the right kind of job. So it's all about making sure people are a good fit. And that module looks at not only what those tests are, but how they're carried out. And you do get to carry a lot of them out as part of the the module itself, and the strengths and weaknesses, how to assess, how to evaluate, how to work out the statistics, the mathematics behind those tests. Contemporary issues in policing looks at modern day challenges, and of all of the various modules you will do, this is the one that changes quite a lot from year to year because of that word contemporary, so that an issue that's very much to the fore one year might be supplanted by a brand new issue that comes to the fore facing police officers the year after, and the module will adapt to reflect that. So within recent years, not only in this country but America and quite a few other countries, the police have become very conscious, and the public have become very conscious of issues around racial tensions and how the police both recruit members of staff from different ethnic communities, and also how they deal with members of the general public, whether as potential criminals or potential victims or potential witnesses, etc., who come from various different ethnic minorities. So that is quite a contemporary issue in policing at the moment, but 5 years down the line, there might be totally different issues that have come to the fore in policing. So it looks at all of these ongoing, not always controversial, sometimes they are simply challenges rather than controversial issues that affect police officers. The second semester, Psychology of Marketing and Persuasion, is an interesting area, and if you're thinking from an employment point of view, quite a lucrative area to consider, in that a great many advertising companies, supermarkets, all manner of big businesses often employ psychologists to help shape their marketing, their adverts, both on television, on the internet, in newspapers, billboards, etc., to convince people to buy whatever particular product it is that they're selling. And increasingly, it's also used in the realms of politics by politicians, where they're not so much selling you a used car as they are selling you a used policy, which they want you to vote for and support. So as a technique, the idea of marketing and persuasion is not confined purely to the worlds of commerce, but overlaps into all sorts of other areas of trying to convince people to behave in a certain way. You could even be a little bit controversial and suggest that during the COVID lockdown process, we became acutely aware of the techniques being used by the government and the World Health Organization and so on to persuade people to take up certain behaviors like wearing masks, washing their hands, etc., for reasons of health. Some of those techniques may have worked very, very well. Others of those techniques, not so well. And that module is looking at the styles of persuasion that are used, what works, what doesn't work, etc. Understanding criminal profiling is a module that everybody will do. It's not an optional one, it's a standard one. Lots of people these days are quite keen on the idea of profiling because there's a lot of TV programs that deal with FBI agents and so forth in American TV shows, and police officers in this country, police officers in Australia, Canada, all of these other different TV shows from around the world who engage in profiling. Now, the television version is often terribly glamorous and all flying around in jet planes and investigating horrific serial killings and coming up with very insightful profiles of prospective serial killers. That is certainly an element of what goes on in places like Quantico in America, which is an FBI research establishment. But criminal profiles are also used by, having mentioned supermarkets a minute ago, but by large-scale retailers to identify potential shoplifters. They're used by security services to identify potential terrorists. They're used by the police in identifying potential sexual offenders, whether that's serial rapists or paedophiles or what have you. So it's not only serial killers, it's profiling in a whole variety of different criminal contexts. So it looks at the history of profiling, what techniques are used, how effective those profiles are, how accurate they are, and the weaknesses within profiling as well. And the community public involvement in crime is based upon the principle that the vast majority of policing in this and pretty much every country around the world is what's referred to as consensus policing. in that there are a tiny number of police officers and a very large number of members of the general public, and the police clearly cannot be everywhere at once, so they rely on the public to phone up and report crimes, to get involved sometimes in terms of prevention, like getting burglar alarms fitted on your house, but also in terms of things like parents being aware of internet safety for their children. So there's all sorts of ways in which the community can get involved in preventing crime or reporting it once it has happened. Some members of the general public are fairly hostile towards the police. Other members are very supportive of the police and see the police as a very positive force, and we'll be looking at the kind of factors that shape the public's view of the police, both on the negative side, but also on the positive side. Okay, so in terms of just looking at the first semester for the first year and going into a little bit more detail, not too much, but a little bit more detail. I won't go into any more detail than I already have done on levels 5 and 6, because you'll find out about those years in much more detail in the lead up to your getting there. So we'll just think about what you would expect to encounter in your first year. If we can go on to the next, thank you. So in terms of the research methods, looking at the research techniques involved in psychology, Louise teaches that module, and at the moment it's hoped that this will be running on a Wednesday morning. Timetables will be going out to confirm for definite if that is the case in the quite near future, but the hope is that that will be the time slot. In terms of formative assessments, and if you're unfamiliar with that term, a formative assessment does not count towards your final grade. It's something we ask you to do in order to develop skills at a particular activity. And we do give you feedback to tell you whether you've done it well or whether you need to polish up in certain areas. But it is more about developing skills than it is about putting you to the test. So there's a variety of various different research tasks that you get asked to do, and you get some feedback on. You also have an online exam that you take part in, ideally in the class, but obviously if we were to ever find ourselves in another pandemic, then potentially that could be done from home. And 2 written reports where you go out, conduct some research, which Louise will guide you as to what that research is, and then you collate the statistics for experiments and interviews and so forth, and you write up reports. And it's explained to you in the class how to lay out those reports precisely, because there's a very certain form in which psychological reports have to be presented. It's not like an essay, it's a very different thing from an essay. For those of you who have been in education recently enough to remember what it's like writing essays, this is a whole other ball game. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add into that, Louise, or whether you feel that's already covered the key points.
I think you've covered the key points, Robin. But yeah, the main thing is lots of people get put off by studying research methods in psychology because they think it's all about maths and statistics, and there is definitely that element to it, but we take it right back to basics and build up from, you know, the very first building blocks of what it is that you need to know. So if you're thinking, oh, I hated maths at school, I'm not going to be able to study psychology, please don't think that. I was exactly the same. I hated maths at school, and now I'm teaching research methods. You know, it's a whole different ball game. So please don't be put off.
and there's plenty of support for anyone who is a bit maths adverse. Always worth bearing in mind that maths, basically, no matter how complicated the statistics look, it all usually boils down to add this number to that number, multiply this number by that number. It's the basic adding, subtracting, dividing and multiplying, and if you can do that, feel free to use a calculator, then you simply follow the steps and you'll be taken through the steps as to what you add to what you divide by what, etc. So it's nice and straightforward. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Continuing with psychology, the developmental and social psychologists mentioned earlier, developmental psychology for a lot of people who are interested in psychology often are drawn to child psychology, and certainly a part of developmental psychology is child psychology in terms of how the child develops its cognitive, physical, emotional, social, other skills. But a key point to remember with developmental psychology is that the overall discipline is the entire lifespan, from birth through to old age. Obviously, we don't expect you to know about the entirety of the human lifespan in one module, which is why it's spread over 2 years, the introductory one, and then the level 5, which builds upon what you do here at level 4. But it explores childhood, adolescence, maturity, old age, and how cognitive abilities, thinking abilities, problem-solving abilities, emotional patterns, social relationships, etc., how they develop and change over the course of a lifetime. Social psychology is a kind of veering towards where sociology is, in that both social psychology and sociology look at people in large numbers rather than people as individuals. So it's the ways in which our behaviour change when we are getting sociable, or sometimes anti-sociable, with other people. So issues like, for example, the development of friendships, the development of romances, the development of prejudice, why people come to dislike and discriminate against certain types of other people, even if they've never met them before, how those biases and assumptions develop, how people fit into teams, and why some people never do fit into a team, why some people tend to fall into leadership roles and other people are maybe better suited at being the class clown, or at being the diplomat who smooths over the troubled waters whenever there is contention within a situation. So it looks at all sorts of issues to do with social engagement and development, and lays the groundwork for who the big names are, the big theorists, the big ideas, how they did their research, and gets you familiar with these subjects in a very broad way. And the hope is that that will be running on a Thursday afternoon, but as I say, all the timetables will be confirmed in the not too distant future. You've got a number of quizzes to take. Again, these don't count towards your final grade, but they are to partly to test what you know, but also to help you realise, and this is quite an important issue people often forget about, once you realise what you don't know, where the gaps are in your knowledge, then you can go to your tutor and say, well, I really didn't understand so-and-so issue. Can you go over that again in a bit more depth? And then that fills in the gaps. If you don't realise where the gaps in your knowledge are, you're never going to be able to fill them in, because you don't know what those gaps are to start with. So it's always a useful thing to realise what you're not sure about, as well as that lovely moment when you know exactly what the right answer is in a quiz, and you could go, aha, and suddenly you feel very confident in your knowledge because you've come up with the right answer. There's also, in terms of the graded work, there's an essay to write. You get a set of questions and you choose one of them and write an essay on that. And there is a poster presentation in which you're asked to design a poster. You're given guidelines on how to do that, and basically you put your poster up either on the big screen if you do it electronically, or potentially you could do it as a printed off poster, and you take, as a presentation, you take members of the class through what your poster is about and the ideas and so forth contained on your poster. We do encourage people to develop, not just in this module, but a variety of other modules, their presentation skills, to stand up in front of others, and we do appreciate that sometimes that can be quite nerve-wracking. People will say, well, can I just present to the teacher? I'm a bit nervous about doing it in front of a dozen, 2 dozen people I don't know terribly well. And that is an option, so you can have a smaller scale presentation. But the hope is that by second year, by your final year, your self-confidence will be developed and your presentation skills will be developed to the point where you can, by the end of the course, happily stand up in front of a room full of people and wax lyrical, because that is quite a useful skill to have in many, many jobs, to be able to take with you and do that after you graduate. So if we can go on to the next one, thank you. Key Thinkers in Criminology deals with who the big theorists, the purveyors of the big ideas in criminology are. This year that was taught by Barry Martin, but we're not sure what the staffing situation is for next year, and we hope that will be running of a Friday morning, but again that will be confirmed shortly. there's various forms of research you're encouraged to go and do as part of that, and then you present what you found from those research projects to the class. Not graded, but a useful skill to have. In terms of the evaluated pieces, you're asked to write 2 essays. One is on criminological theory, analysing and evaluating those theories, and the other is on the criminal justice system. That is to say, the police, the prison service, and the court service. So you choose an element of that, either the police or the prisons or the courts, and you explain the functioning of the criminal justice system, how it operates, and what the various theorists and researchers have had to say about that over the years. Thank you. So looking at your first semester for the sociology with criminology, when you get to the Christmas, you'll have your second semester explained to you. So we're just looking at first semester for the purposes of today. And I see this question. So full-time, yes. If you study full-time, it's over 3 years. You can study part-time and stretch it out a bit longer, where instead of doing 3 modules in one semester, you might do 1 module or 2 modules and then do the other ones in the subsequent years, and you stretch it out a little bit longer. If you were, for example, trying to fit in your studies around a demanding job, you might want to spread it out over more than the 3 years. So I won't cover the criminology issues here because we've already done that. It's well, the key thinkers one we've already done, but the introduction to qualitative methods, not dissimilar to the module in psychology, but qualitative methods are more favoured in sociology, so we'll go over those. The introduction to the sociological imagination is explored in more depth, and the big deal module, which takes place in semester 2, looks at issues around drugs. Now, it was noted when we were planning this degree that quite a lot of people are interested in becoming drug workers, support workers, therapists, working in rehab and things like that. So we have a module that goes into what the various different types of street drugs are, and what addiction is, what alcoholism is, why people turn to various different substances, the theories that explain that. And also we look at the different types of therapy that and rehabilitation that are used, and look at the evaluation of them. So which types of therapy work best, which types of therapy maybe are not as successful as others. So we explore that in more depth. And then you've also in the second semester got online crime, which is pretty much what it sounds like on the tin. These days, as just about everything else has gone online, so crime has gone online, phishing scams, identity theft, online paedophile rings, trading obscene images, people buying and selling weapons, buying and selling drugs, all manner of things that can be done online now. So we look at the wide variety of online crime, what the police are doing about it, and the theories that exist to explain whether or not there is a substantial difference between, say, knocking on an elderly person's front door and trying to fleece them of their life savings, or hacking into their bank account and trying to fleece their life savings that way. Are these identical crimes, or is there a different sort of mentality involved on the part of the criminal, and a different impact possibly on the victim? The crime in the media module looks at how the newspapers, TV, films, the internet and the radio and so forth, how they present crime, both factually in terms of news programmes, but also works of fiction, whether that's Sherlock Holmes or Poirot or Peaky Blinders or whatever else, how crime is presented in the media, because thankfully in this country we are sufficiently lucky that most of us will never have direct personal experience of crime. We will, however, see a hell of a lot of crime shows on the telly. And so what we know about crime is usually more to do with the fictional world of crime than it is with direct realistic life experience. So it does have a big impact on shaping our views. And in the space of 2 minutes, I will attempt to cover a couple of modules for you. So that goes on in the second year to look at conducting sociological research, goes into more depth on that side of things. Again, builds on the research angle. How society works takes you through the big theorists and the big ideas in terms of how society works as a whole, how it comes together, how it operates. The criminology modules have already explained. So the sociology of crime goes into more depth on looking at the big social forces that shape and drive some people into a life of crime, arguably drive them, although there's always the argument of personal choice and free will, and the large-scale social projects that governments and charities and various other agencies engage in to reduce crime, what works well, what doesn't work so well. If we can go on to the next. Again, won't touch on the criminology because we've already done that. So the sociology of law and order looks at how the police and the court systems operate from a sociological point of view. What are the functions of the police? What are the functions of the courts? How do people feel when they are either working for the police or being interviewed by police as witnesses, as victims, as potential suspects in crimes? What it's like to actually stand in the witness box or sit in the jury box in a courtroom. What's it like to be a magistrate? Magistrates are chosen from members of the public. They're sort of drawn in, so potentially anyone could end up as a magistrate. Now, having on the psychology and criminology one explained about the different options, won't go over that again, but should your dissertation be primarily focused on criminology, then instead of doing the community and public involvement in crime module, you would be asked to do the politics, propaganda and international relations module, which is a sociological one, and that pretty much deals with exactly what it sounds like. The sociological understandings behind politics, left-wing, right-wing, centrist politics in this country, in America, Australia, Canada, China, Russia, all sorts of different countries we look at. The power of propaganda to convince people to vote this way or that way, to support this cause or support that cause, and how different countries with their different political systems relate internationally, as well as big organizations like the European Union, for example, and United Nations and so forth, how they operate, how they came into existence, what the sociological theories are that explain their functioning. So we explore all of that in a varying levels of depth and get to engage in all sorts of hopefully enjoyable experiences and entertaining activities. And some of this does include things like field trips, visiting speakers. So it's not just sitting in a class being talked at, it's exploring through a wide variety of activities where you go in the future. How are we doing on time?
I think it would be time to pass back to me, if that's okay, Robin.
Yep, certainly.
Super, thank you so much. Hopefully this is giving you an idea of those watching at home of the variety of information that you'll have access to and how actually you can manage and direct your education in the pathway that you're most interested in. So those optional modules or optional sort of tasks that you'll complete, that gives you real ownership of your degree or whatever course that you choose to study with us. So hopefully lots of information. We appreciate that. There's certainly lots of this can be found on our website after this evening's event, plus this will be recorded and sent out to everyone that's requested to join this evening. So don't worry, we will follow this up and you will have access to this information. So the final part this evening is for me to go through the courses that sort of apply to all of the areas that we've had under this umbrella of the evening and how to apply to those courses. So it is me for the remainder of this session. So the courses, obviously you've had lots of overview here of particularly the human sciences courses that we offer, but we do have a range of not just subjects but types of education that you can study with us. So vast majority will obviously think of the degrees because we're university studies. So we have, as Robin and Louise have spoken about, the sociology and criminology courses, applied sociology, psychology, and then the psychology and criminology. So lots of ologies combined there. I appreciate that. But we all do have other courses that are related to the areas. So we have early childhood studies and potentially the policing degree might be an area of interest for you. We also have HNCs and HNDs within business, and business is one of those titles that was included in this evening's information. So I'm going to talk you through very briefly the new business HNC and HND courses that we have at University Studies. So very briefly, An HNC is a one-year course. It is equivalent to the first year of university studies, and the HND is the diploma, which is the second year of university studies. So if you think of it as a two-year course for the HND, you'll do the HNC in the first year and the HND in the second year. Within the business course HNC, HND, you have two pathways available to you. You have the entrepreneurism and small business management pathway, and also the business and finance pathway. So within these, there will be core units that you'll complete as part of the business course, but depending on the pathway that you pursue, you will have different units that you'll complete. So if you're more thinking about sort of the excitement and informative program study with business management and entrepreneurism. So if you're trying to start a business, that might be your pathway. But if you're more focused on the finance and sort of legislation within business and accounting almost, it might be that's the pathway you pursue. So to give you a very brief overview, the level 4 course, the HNC, which is year 1 as a recap, the core courses, core subjects for the business course are on that left-hand side. So you've obviously got the business and business environment, marketing processes and planning, human resource management, accounting principles, and managing a successful business project. And then it will be a case of the other two units would be, depending on your pathway, so potentially that innovation and commercialism, or the entrepreneurial venture, or the accounting and finance. It'll be the recording, financial transactions, and then the data and numerical skills. So that would be year 1 as the main work that will be completed. And then in year 2, which is the level 5 or HND, so that's the diploma, you again have those core subjects on the left hand side and more of the pathway subjects on the right. So first year you had 2 pathway subjects, and second year you have 3 pathway subjects. So what that means is, again, like the other courses, because you have optional units in a variety of the courses that we offer, you really do take ownership of how you want your education to move forward. So that's a very, very quick sort of overview of the HNC, HND. Please do look on the website for more information, but it does mean that you gain an accreditation, a qualification after the first year and the second year, and if you wanted to, you could then move into a third year with us and get the full degree. So as it stands, would be a 2-year course for the HND, and the first year is made up of that HNC. So moving on from the HNC's HND in business, we do have access courses as well. So if you're not at the point where you are qualified or you feel ready for a full degree or an HNC and D, but you're aged 19 and over and you haven't yet got a level 3 qualification, then you could study with us on an access to higher education course. And as you can see on screen, there's a variety of subjects that we offer in that area. So obviously the ones pertinent to this evening are listed. So that would be a 1-year course that would give you the skills and some of the background knowledge that you could then take on to be successful within the degree programme as well. And if we have any people watching this evening that are still at school and you're just about to leave, so looking for your post-16 options, please do look at the website for the courses available at West Suffolk College, because there is an absolute plethora available to you. And depending on what you want to study with us, you do have a different way of applying. So for the degrees and the full-time HNC and D, you'd need to apply via Ucas. And for our access courses, post-16 options and the part-time HNC and D, you just apply through the West Suffolk College website. So what does that actually look like? Applying through Ucas, once you're happy with looking at our website with the course content and the structure and being confident on the entry criteria for our degrees or our HNC and D, then you can go on to Ucas. Ucas is the central hub for all university applications across the country. So you would register as a new user if you don't yet have an account, and then it's very much an online application, as you might see for kind of almost anything. but it is going to be more substantial. So they make it quite clear. You click on the Start Your Application button once you've registered your account, and these are the sorts of screens that you'll be seeing. So it's just kind of a visual prompt for you. You click on the undergraduate provision because you are not yet graduated from university, so therefore you're an undergraduate, and start clicking through all the various sections that they need you to complete. And it's quite nice. It shows you visually what progress you're making within that application. One of the first things that you can do is add a choice. So to find one of our degrees, you need to search for West Suffolk College. That's the name of the university or college. And then with the course, you just start typing the name of the course that you're interested in, and it will bring up the suggestion. So I've used the example on screen here of the Sociology and Criminology course. You can see I just started typing Sociology and it suggested that course. So then you can click on that, and that's one of your options added to your application. It is worth noting that University Studies in Bury is very much targeted as a local provision, so for people that live pretty much in the area or the region. So when you're asked the question, will you be living at home, you do need to select yes, as we don't have accommodation. Robin mentioned before about the nature of the teaching of our courses, and because we are a small provision and very supportive, full-time education at University Studies doesn't actually mean 5 days a week. A lot of the teaching is condensed into 2 days or maybe 3. So if there are parents listening and you have childcare or you have a job that you need to manage alongside, it's absolutely possible for you to still continue education or restart your education while studying with us. It is certainly manageable. Lots of work, but definitely doable. So then it's a case of filling in all of the details that the application would require. Lots of personal details, obviously, about you, about your educational background, employment history, and other things to make sure that we can get you on the right course for you. So please make your way through the entire application, filling in the details, and as the section is completed, you'll get a green tick next to it, and the entire application needs to have those green ticks. One of the last ones that you might do is inserting your personal statement. We'd recommend that you write this in a Word document and then paste it in once it's done. But as a summary, a personal statement is about you. It's giving us as the university a perspective of who you are as an individual to make sure that you're on track for the right programme. So explain why you'd like to study the particular course that you're applying for, what makes you suitable, so your relevant experience, your education, your interests and other achievements. And it's really important that you keep in mind this is a 4,000 character maximum, and that includes spaces. So please do check on the word and character count in a Word document before you add it, because it will cut it off at 4,000. So just keep that in mind. So the entire process is obviously you select your courses and you apply. We will then review your application, and all things being well, we'll confirm an offer to you. If you'd like to accept that course, that'd be fantastic. We'd love that. So you accept that as your firm choice, and then you will be applying for student finance to ensure that your course fees are in place, and then we'll keep in touch with you for the rest of the year, and certainly over the summer you'll get information about how to enrol. And then you'll attend induction. So again, we're making sure that you're comfortable and happy in your move onto University Studies, and then you'll start your course. However, if you're looking to do those access courses or that part-time HNC and D course, you'd apply for the West Suffolk College website. So that looks very different. So just as a kind of prompt here, you go onto the website, you'd look at the adult education section because it's for 19 plus. Select the area that you're most interested in, click on that course where it will take it through to something that explains more about that course to make sure you're happy with that. And then on the right hand side, and this is true for all of our courses, you'll have that big red button that says apply online. That will take you through to an area for you to create a new account on our admissions page. So register as a new user, if that's the case, and then you will add the course that you're interested in and complete the application. all the steps that you would expect. So personal details, educational history, all that sort of stuff. All of this is certainly very useful for you to help make decisions about your future, but also coming along to our open event on Saturday, the 25th of June. It's in the morning, 9:30 until 12:30. That will help you make decisions as well. You'll get a feel for the building. You'll see and meet people that are as interested in the course as you. You may well meet some of the lecturers or some of the staff that are based at University Studies. So please do come along. We're putting on an extra event this year because things at the beginning of the year were tricky with COVID lockdown. So we'd really love to see you on Saturday, the 25th of June. And then anyone that's a bit younger, that's not yet looking to apply to come this September, we do have our sort of following year open event in November. But all of those details are available on our website. So, folks, I hope that you found this evening useful. Lots of information, I'm sure you'd agree, and I do thank Louise and Robin for your time. Really interesting stuff. So thank you very much. And for everyone at home, thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you soon at our open event. Thank you.